Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone to Garden of Doom, and this week we have our guest Darius Kamali, and he has a great podcast that's pretty new, so you can catch it from the beginning. And it's called the Persian Corner, and if you the Persian version. I'm sorry, the Persian Corner is the poem. And I binge listened to all of the shows in one night. Now it's helpful that some of them are around 10 minutes or less. But there's also a few that were much longer, including a very interesting one. Well, they're all interesting, but you get Iran versus Persian, Persian versus Farsi. There was one that, yes, King Arthur is involved as well. So check it out. I don't want to, spoil it for you, but check those shows out and put it on your subscribe. He's also one of those people who said to me, I don't want to claim to be an expert about anything, and then proceeded to use tons of words that I barely know, and the names of about 900 different tribes, peoples, languages, and can tell you everything about the linguistics tree and all the things that annoy me about myself that I don't know. So it's the reason I have this show, so that I can learn these things, or at least hear them enough that I can parrot them. So with that, I first want to say thank you and good afternoon, Darius. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much. What an introduction. Yeah. A lot of those words, with the internet these days, we all have access to information. I am not an expert in the sense that I don't have a degree in that subject. I come from a film and philosophy background, but I have worked among the many hats I've worn as a researcher and a field and segment producer for a number of History Channel programs in the past, especially one on the history of Iraq. And that's what really got me started in the, I guess you could call it a rabbit hole, of the history of the Middle Eastern and Western Asian peoples. And more recently, particularly in the pandemic, or the opportunity provided by the pandemic, I started first a Facebook group, and then also an audio podcast called The Persian Version, which is devoted to Iranian, Iranic, Persianate culture, art, and history. And these words are related to each other, but they're not exactly the same.
Yep. Very interesting stuff. And like I said, the show is very interesting. And we're going to try and do like a summary of some of the big stuff. And for the audience that listened to the show that I released about a month ago on the Russian Empire, the Peoples of the Russian Empire with J.P. Bristow, we are going to cover some of the same ground, almost literally. But we're going to, whereas J.P. probably focused equally on Iranic and Turkic, and then, then sort of slowly moved. We focus a lot on the Scythians, which definitely are going to be part of our story today. I think that generally speaking, this is very generally, the people that JP then focus on sort of go north and then sort of back east and west. And I think the people that Darius talk about sort of go south and then back east and west again. And that is a huge oversimplification of it. But if some of it sounds familiar, it is, but there might be little differences, and that's cool too, because there's differences from different historians' backgrounds. I heard you don't have a degree, but I would say that if you could, or if there was a professor out there that could grant one just by hearing your knowledge, they'd probably grant you one. But
an honorary,
yeah, maybe so.
From a journalistic perspective.
Fair enough. So I'm going to let you tell the people as opposed to me telling the people, and we'll start with, as we call it, sort of the proto peoples. And the story of the Iranic peoples does not start in Iran or Persia. It starts much further east. So this show has been been going out ever further east, partly by design, and we're sort of going step by step. So, we're going to visit the steps with the STEPPE.
Step by step.
Yeah, step by step. So maybe that should be. Well, now the show is going to be called the Persian version, but if it wasn't, it would be step by steps. But that maybe I'll have a subtitle in parentheses.
Subtitle, yeah, I'm into the subtitles myself. I actually would like to start with a quote from Joseph Campbell that I dug up because I remember it from years ago. I sort of cut my teeth growing up on his Myths to Live By and the Masks of God series.
Who's Joseph Campbell, before you give the quote?
Sure. So Joseph Campbell he's not alive anymore. He died in the 1980s. But he was made famous in the popular culture because of a number of interviews on the World of Ideas on PBS with Bill Moyers. Mm-hmm. But he is a historian of comparative religion, one of the preeminent historians of comparative religion and mythology. And his major work, his major scholarly work, is a 4-volume series called The Masks of God. And the volumes are, if I remember correctly, primitive mythology, Oriental mythology, Occidental mythology, and creative mythology. In any case, Joseph Campbell remarked that the geographic, and I'm reading this quote from him here, divide between the Oriental and Occidental ranges of myth and ritual is the tableland of Iran. Eastward are the two spiritual provinces of India and the Far East, and westward are Europe and the Levant. And I would add to that, the reason for that is not just geographic, but cultural. And so, who are the Iranians? As you mentioned, Iranian and the word Iranic or Iranian civilization is a much broader and larger term than the modern nation state of Iran. As large as the modern nation state is compared to many states, it's minuscule compared to the vast range of the Iranic and Iranian peoples. And to step back from that, the Iranian peoples are a branch, an ethno-linguistic branch of a larger ethno-linguistic family called Indo-European. Indo-European is the largest ethno-linguistic family of languages in the world. And some of its categories, some of its subdivisions, I should say, include Germanic, which includes English within it.
Yep.
Italic, which includes Latin, Greek, and Celtic, And on the eastern side of that same family, you have Indo-Iranian and Tokharian, which is a smaller branch, goes even further east. Then that Indo-Iranian branch is itself subdivided by linguists and anthropologists into the Indo-Aryans. These are the people who, let me actually geographically situate this. Where did the Indo-Europeans begin? Most anthropologists believe, although none of this is entirely certain, there's arguments within academia about the minutiae of all of this. Mm-hmm. But the mainstream theory today is that these people, as far back as we can trace them, come from the area that we would now call Eurasia, north of the Black Sea, the Eurasian steppe. Some would push them a little bit further east between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. But essentially what is now parts of Russia and Ukraine. And this is where the PI people, that's an acronym for Proto-Indo-European. Huh. That's their homeland. Now, some of these branched off and became what I just mentioned, the Germanic people and the Italic people and the Greeks and the Celts. And some of them went eastward, migrated eastward, and became the Indo-Iranians. Those Indo-Iranians, again, split in two. And the Indo-Aryan branch are the people who migrated into what is now northern India and mixed with the local Dravidian culture that existed there already for thousands of years.
Dravidian?
And what is that?
Dravidian? Is that the word?
Dravidian, yeah. So the Dravidians are the indigenous peoples of India before this Aryan northern migration into northern India. They're much darker. Their religion and culture is different. But the mixing of the Dravidians and these Indo-Aryans from the north created both the Sanskrit language, which is one of the oldest recorded Indo-European languages with a writing system, mm-hmm. as well as the Vedic religions. So we're talking about basically the religions we now call Hinduism. And the caste system, more controversially. The Indo-Europeans were very caste conscious even before meeting these indigenous peoples wherever they went, even within their own societal structures. There certainly were three major castes. One was the military, the other one was agriculture, and the other one was basically the shamanistic caste or priesthood.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so the Indo-Aryans created what we now call Hinduism, and their cousins, the other branch of Indo-Iranian, went slightly westward down into what is now called the Iranian Plateau, named after them. Went south on the eastern side of the Caspian Sea into the Iranian Plateau. And it's those people who created Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet or philosopher. He's sort of a half, some call him the first philosopher in history, others call him the first revealed prophet. He's really both. When did that happen? We're not really sure. There's multiple theories. So the oldest, you could say, chronology for Zoroaster, believe it or not, goes as far back as 6,000 BC.
Wow.
It's not it's a minority view. There's a book written about it. If that is true, then you can't really even say that Zoroaster is Iranian because it's before the Iranians separated from the rest of the Proto-Indo-European. So if that theory is true, Zoroaster is an extremely early Proto-Indo-European figure. Most historians don't believe that he's that old. Most historians place him closer to somewhere between 12 to 1500 BC. Okay. And as recently as 700 BC.
So that's interesting because that is loosely around the time that the Old Testament was said to be written. I mean, it might have been as old as 1500 BC, and it might have been finished around 700 BC. BC.
Yeah.
Which is about 3,500 years ago to 2,700 years ago.
Give or take a couple of years, right? Who's counting?
Who's counting years between friends? I think this is a great time to back up a little bit. And so, one, I think it's important that the audience understands the difference between, even though the words sound the same, Aryan, A-R-I-A-N, and Aryan, A-R-Y-A-N. And I know that's a big topic, but if we could just spend, 90 seconds on it.
It's actually the same word. Aryan is what the Iran, in fact, the word Iran means Aryan. It's the Aryan pronunciation of Aryan.
Mm-hmm.
So for people who are, uncomfortable with that term because of recent politics and what happened in World War II, the Iranians had nothing to do with it. They have called themselves the Aryans from the beginning of time. Hitler misappropriated that. In fact, that goes back to the 19th century, that some German and French scholars, starting with Gabinow, started to misappropriate that term. So Aryan is the word that was used for what we now call Indo-European. So in that sense, up until World War II, what I just described as all these Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European peoples, all of them were called Aryans in all the literature. After World War II, because the word Aryan took on a negative connotation, obviously, because of the horrors of Hitler and the Nazis, now scholars have begun to use it more specifically just for the Eastern Indo-Europeans, meaning the Indo-Aryans, Indo-Iranians.
Okay.
And for the larger group, which includes most of Europe, they just use Indo-European.
Okay.
But just understand that we're talking about the same people.
Okay. Were there blonde-haired, blue-eyed Iranic peoples?
So let's discuss that. So if the question is, what did these people look like phenotypically? There's a great variety, right? So from what we know from the genes that we found in the Scythian mummies from that era, so on and so forth, and actual mummies that have been preserved, and the art and sculpture and paintings that we have from that era, these East Indo-Europeans, or Aryans as they called themselves, which is where the word Iran comes from, were fairly Europoid or Caucasoid, Caucasian looking. Mm-hmm. Not quite as light-skinned as today's Western Europeans. They may have had something close to what an Afghan Tajik would look like today, right? Or an Afghan Pashtun with the hazel eyes and the light hair, but maybe darker skin. However, all this is a little misleading, because keep in mind that these are vast regions and these are just linguistic groups. Right. So it's not one race per se, if there really is even such a thing as a race. And so when the Indo-Europeans of the East, the Aryans, referred to themselves as Aryans, they were talking about their tribe. I mean, they didn't have the same notion of race as we do today. But as with many ancient tribes, they did feel, and this is not new, it's basically anthropology 101, where anyone in the tribe next door is basically barely human, right? They did see themselves as the superior people, or actually what the term literally means is the noble people, right? So I don't think it had during that time any kind of racial connotation to it, and certainly the Iranian peoples and the Indo-Aryans of India mixed with the indigenous people. And today, if you go to Iran, you have dark-skinned people. In the north, you have lighter-skinned people. In India, the same thing. And the Indo-Europeans who went westward and mixed with the indigenous peoples of Europe became lighter and lighter, and that may have to do with geography.
But there was no ruling class writ large of Iranic peoples. There were blonde-haired, blue-eyed to serve. In other words, the myth, which, I mean, was propagated mostly by people who were not blonde-haired or blue-eyed, but the whole myth of this superhuman is not based on some hierarchy that actually started in the Iranic peoples at any point.
No, I mean, if you look, let me put it this way. these people of the ancient worlds, whether Iranic or otherwise, were not modern liberals, right? So they had xenophobia and, our group versus their group, like anyone else, but not the variety of racism that 19th century Europeans created, right? In fact, more specifically, the people that the Germans were referring to as Aryans were Nordic. Nordic is a particular variety of Indo-European. The Indo-Europeans who called themselves Aryans were actually slightly darker. So it's an irony of history, right?
Yeah, that's sort of what I was trying to get to, is that it is not that it's just, like you said, misappropriation. So we're going to move off that rather unpleasant. But when we're using the word Aryan, unless we specify otherwise, we mean Iranian, Iran.
That's right.
That's
right. And that is the way anthropologists today use it. They apply it only to the Indo-Iranian, Indo-Aryan branch of Indo-European. Right.
We're not talking about the Aryan Brotherhood in prison or anything.
No. Those are ethnically Nordics from the Germanic branch of Indo-European. Yeah.
Or as Faye may have it, just people who end up being white and want to claim something about themselves.
Yeah. Sure.
All right. So let's also back up to geography. So where did the Iranic peoples come from originally? Because I think it may surprise people as to where the origins were, at least to the extent that you know it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the peoples of Iran today are a combination of multiple groups. There's the indigenous peoples of Mesopotamia and Elam and the Arata civilization and the Giro civilization, who occupied and lived in what is now called the Iranian Plateau, long before the Indo-Iranians or Aryans moved south into it. And the people who gave the country its name are these Indo-Europeans who came from the north. Again, they go back to the same Proto-Indo-European homeland north of the Black Sea. So we're talking about several thousand years BC. And one branch of these people, the corded ware culture, is one of the subcategories. By the time they go further east, they meet the Andronova culture. I mean, we could go into the details of one anthropological group versus another, but basically these are a branch of those same Indo-European or Proto-Indo-European peoples who migrated for climatic reasons eastward and then southward into the Iranian plateau. And these people split into, and this split, by the way, is a linguistic split that's used today by anthropologists. We're not sure if they themselves saw themselves in this way or would have categorized themselves in this way. But today they are split into the Eastern Iranian language group and the Western. The Eastern includes such people as the Saka, who are better known as the Scythians.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah. And the Massagatai, a little later the Sarmatians, the Sogdians. These are steppe peoples who lived on their horses and in wagons. And these are the people who invented trousers, pants, because they were on their horses all the time, whereas much of the rest of the world was in togas or tunics or some variation of that.
It makes sense now that you think about it.
Yeah, and they had a religion that can be described as a sort of shamanistic Aryan religion, which included gods such as Mitra and Varuna and Indra. You may recall these names from Hindu religion and mythology. Mm-hmm. And then there were the Western Iranian-speaking peoples who went southwest into the Iranian plateau as far as Mesopotamia and encountered the much older, more civilized, more urban culture complex of Mesopotamia. These people include the Persians, or Parsua they were called, the Medes, the Cimmerians possibly. And these are the people who went on to create, first the Median Kingdom, and then what the West knows as the Persian Empire.
Right. How does this compare to, I don't know if compare is the right word, but the Turkic peoples and like the Mongols and the Huns? What are the differences there? Is it just a question of time? Is it a question of geography?
It's a question of time and linguistics and geography. That's an entirely different group.
Okay.
So during this era, now later they all mix.
Right.
Right. But during the era we're talking about, which is all BC so far,
it's funny I say right as if I know. Now I know.
The Eurasian steppes were populated, as far as we know, entirely by these Indo-European Aryan peoples. Eastern, Western, Scythian, what have you. The Turkic people are an entirely different ethno-linguistic group. They're not a part of Indo-European. They come from further east, what is now Siberia and Mongolia. And they enter the picture around the 6th, 7th century AD. So much, much later.
Mm.
They start, and in fact, it's that Turkic, which includes Hunnic, the Huns, population pressure from the east in the 6th, 7th, 8th centuries that starts to push these Indo-European Iranic peoples west into Europe.
Doesn't the Huns, and I know that's how we're focusing, don't they have like a language unique to Europe? It's like the everything else is Indo-European, and then the Huns still have their own sort of.
Are you talking about Hungarian?
I guess so. I don't know.
I don't know if the Huns had much of a lasting impression on the languages of Europe, but there are, if this is what you're referring to, there are several European languages that are not Indo-European, that are isolates. That's correct.
Yeah.
And very strange. We don't really know. They predate the Indo-European invasions or migrations into Europe. And those include the Basque region in northern Spain, and a couple of smaller Eastern European and Baltic regions. And Finnish is another one, is not Indo-European.
That's Finno-Ugarian, is that correct?
That's right, yeah. It's just a whole other language group, as is the Turkic that you were referring to. Now, again, if you go forward in time to the 6th century AD onward, then these people do migrate and start intermingling with each other, to the point where today, let me say a word about the Turks. So the Turks came from, the Turkic people, I should say, came from what is now Siberia. They are phenotypically closer to the Mongols, right, or were at the time. But they started settling in these Iranic lands and then into Iran, Persia at the time, and became, at that time, Islamized, because at that time Persia itself had been converted to Islam because of the Arab invasions from the south.
Mm-hmm.
And they created the Seljuk kingdom and then later the Ottoman Empire. So the people of Turkey, the country of Turkey today, although they are linguistically Turkic, right, ethnically they're a combination of Persians, Armenians, Greeks, and Balkans.
Yes, and
right?
do not try and get in between those people arguing about stuff. I made the mistake of going into one of those Facebook groups, and I think that Palestinians and Israelis speak more nicely to each other than these folks do.
You're right.
I had to get out. It was absolutely awful. Oh my God, there was. I distracted myself. There was something that I wanted to mention, and I completely lost it. I'll probably get it again. So yeah, continue with your exposition. I promise.
You're absolutely right. And there's a term that's used in politics called balkanization, and people from the Balkans hate that term, but it's this complete atomization of various peoples, even though they're geographically close, who don't see each other as part of the same tribe.
Yeah, I mean, Turkey was Anatolia for a while, at least the westernmost parts of it, and all those other countries were sort of loosely, I guess, considered Thrace, including or maybe until you got to Greece.
Yeah, well, going back to the Middle East, I'll tell you there's three major, there's lots of minor groups, right? And we don't have time for that.
Yeah.
But the three major categories ethno-linguistically are the Indo-Iranians or Aryans, Indo-Europeans, which include the Persians, the Kurds, Kurdish people, the Armenians, going back in time, the Scythians, Sarmatians, Cimmerians, so on, Kassites. That's one group. Then you have an even older group who are Semitic, and that includes the Arabs, the Aramaeans before them, the Hebrews, and many of the Mesopotamian peoples, Babylonians, Assyrians, so on and so forth. And then the most recent group are these Turkic peoples who came from further east, northeast, from Siberia, but adopted Islam at the time because that was the religion at the time that they arrived. And so you have the three major linguistic populations of Eurasia all present genetically and culturally in what is now Western Asia or the Middle East. It's the most diverse population in the world of the old world. I won't compare it to the new world because we're all immigrants from every country in the world.
Sure.
But for the old world, it is clearly the most linguistically, culturally, and genetically diverse population.
Now, my guest next week, though I don't know the order of dropping shows, but Andy from the History of Africa may disagree with you on that. But that's all right. That's not, he's not here, so we don't need to do that debate. Maybe one time we will. Maybe we'll have a linguistics
Happy to
debate.
discuss it at some point.
Yeah, no, he's terrific. He's great. Another podcast.
You mean that it might be even more diverse there?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, he explained.
I'm not an expert in that region, so.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting conversation. Maybe even more so without me. Yeah, he's been on. I commend people to that show. It's called The History of Africa. I also with my episode, I also commend people to the podcast as well, because there's probably a lot of stuff you haven't heard of, and some that you just vaguely did, like the Axumites, which you probably heard if you went to some Bible class at some point, but probably maybe not. Didn't realize there was Ethiopian city that rivaled, Rome at some point. Anyway, enough about that. That's not what we're here to talk about. And I still have lost whatever my ingenious thought was at the time. So the geographic area of the Aryan peoples is far in excess larger than what we know of as Iran now, or really at any point since it's called Iran.
Yeah. It goes at its greatest extent. And now we're including the East Iranians and the West Iranians, all of them together, right? Mm-hmm. From as far east as China, Western China. Some would actually, not to get too far afield, but some scholars have argued that they reached Japan, and that the samurai culture of the Japanese comes from these people. Huh? But certainly they went to China. That part is non-controversial. And then as far west, when they were being pushed by these newcomer Turkic peoples in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th centuries AD, as far west into Europe again as Gaul, modern-day France, and Britain, where some... so let me clarify here to make sure people aren't confused. We know that all of these peoples, the Europeans and the Indo-Iranians, Indo-Aryans, originally came from the Proto-Indo-European, somewhere north of the Black Sea. That's done. We're past that now. Once they have separated and become distinct groups, Indo-Iranians on the one side and the various European groups, the Germanic and Italic on the other side, they have become different cultures at this point and have separated from each other. After that happens, the Indo-Iranian group goes west into Europe again. They migrate again. This is part of the great migrations during the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. We hear about the Germanic peoples coming. Well, along with those Germanics were the Alans and Sarmatians, who were Iranic peoples. These are the barbarian invasions from the north that finally, actually captured Rome.
I want to stop for a second here. First of all, I remember what my silly point was earlier, which is that these isolate languages, as you call them, like on some of my older shows, of course, and with some of my guests, the answers would be quite simple. they would be the Phoenicians, the Atlanteans, the Lemuria, the Hyborians. And also what you were just talking about, how the Iranic peoples actually went as far eastward as China might make some sense of some of the myths from China, that there were there was a lighter skinned tribe, and there were.
We have evidence of it. We have mummies, and we have
right.
Tokharian and Iranian peoples in what is now, so it's China now, right?
Right.
Because China is larger now, so it's Western China now. But it's sort of the region, in fact, that's in the news for all the wrong reasons these days, where the Chinese are putting people in concentration camps and such. So think of it as the furthest eastern part of Central Asia.
Right.
But I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. Yeah, because China is named after the Qin, just probably the most successful, large tribe, and China today is mostly Han Chinese, which they have their own caste system, but that's entirely different story and not a great one. But yeah, there was.
By the way, since you mentioned that, the same thing can be said for Iranian civilization, where you have multiple groups speaking varieties of the same language, mostly interchangeable, but not entirely, and culturally similar, but also different from each other. But there has historically been how can I put it without insulting someone? A culturally dominant group within that, and those are the Persians. Throughout most of recorded history, 500 BC onward, the Persians and their cousins, the Medes, who really became one people from the time of the Persian Achaemenian Empire onward, have been the culturally dominant group, whereas these Eastern Iranian or North Iranian peoples, these steppe peoples, really never wanted to join. Even during the Persian Empire, both Cyrus the Great and Darius the Great tried very hard to bring them to heel, to get them to settle and join the Persian Empire. And some of them did. There's rock carvings, bas-reliefs of Scythians with pointy hats at Persepolis bringing gifts. But many of them resisted because they wanted to keep their nomadic freedom, you could say. These were the Indo-Iranian or Aryan cowboys, you could say. They didn't want to settle. They liked their lifestyle, which was centered around horses and cattle. And there's a famous story, which we're not sure if it's true or not. Xenophon claims that it is, and Herodotus, or the other way around. Herodotus claims that it is, Xenophon doesn't mention it. That Cyrus the Great, in his old age, was actually killed in a skirmish in the northeastern territories of Iran against one of these Scythian queens, Tomyris, who was a Mazakitai queen. And then later, Darius the Great, who is famous also for invading Greece, at Marathon anyway, Xerxes went further, chased his fellow Iranian Scythians around the Black Sea from the western side all the way to Russia, and could never, pin them down because they would, they didn't have any cities. These right. people would just burn their crops, a scorched earth policy, and retreat further and further. And there's a famous story that Darius sort of challenges them and says, "Why don't you you're too afraid to stop and fight?" And they said, "No, we have different values. If you ever go after the cemeteries of our ancestors, then you'll see how we'll fight."
Right. It's a fair warning. When you said northeastern Iran, would that be northeastern Iran now, or would that be more like Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan?
That's right. Good question. So when I say northeastern Iran, I'm talking about the geography of the time. So that would today be Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, these stands. By the word stan or stan, that is the ending of all these countries today, is the Persian word. It simply means province.
Yeah, I assumed it meant land or whatever, but province.
Yeah, that's right. It's somewhere between land or province, territory, or country.
Yeah, because there's a lot more stands than the countries that we know of, and frankly, the we who even knows all these countries is probably a fairly small population to begin with, and I'm not sure that if you put a map in front of me, that I would get all of them right.
Yeah, I'll tell you, in modern Persian, we even call a lot of the European countries, we put a stan after it. So we call Poland or the people, Lahistan. So in the Persian language, there are more stans than there are in the English language.
Wow.
Almost everyone is a stan to us.
And well, stans are fans. So there's also something I probably need you to educate me or disavow me of something, but I had thought the Alans, you pronounce it, I always pronounce it Alans, but obviously I'm sure your pronunciation is correct.
Same word.
Were like Russians who encountered the Persians, and but it sounds like that's not correct.
Yeah, no, so it depends what we mean by Russians, because the Russians today do come from the Alans. The Alans are an Iranian group, a northern or eastern, linguistically eastern Iranian group, geographically north, linguistically east. A subgroup of the Sarmatians, one of the major east-north Iranian groups, these steppe peoples we're talking about. And they're the ones who went furthest west among the ones into Europe during the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. So again, this is long after all these groups had separated. They had become the Indo-Iranians and the Germanics. That separation already occurred. The Indo-Iranians, specifically the Sarmatians and Alans, by the word Alan, that L and R are interchangeable. It's really a corruption of Aryan. It just means Iranian.
Okay.
So it's the same word, again, we're encountering. It's just a local pronunciation. They are not the same as the Slavs. The Slavs are another Indo-European category. They are both Indo-European. There was about 1,000 years where much of Eastern Europe and the Balkans and the Eurasian steppe was populated mostly by these Iranic peoples. Slavification is the term, occurred a little later, where these people mixed with the larger indigenous Slavic population, which are also their own Indo-European cousins, just another branch. And some of them went further west, rode along with the Goths and the Visigoths. The Alans and the Rox Alans, which are another subgroup of the Alans, rode alongside these people as far as Gaul, or France today. Some of them went south into what is we now call Catalonia in Spain, which again is actually also named partly after them. Catalonia is a corruption of Goth Alania.
Oh, okay.
And some of them went even further south into North Africa. So let me just put this in perspective. A lot of people know the history of the Moorish and Arabic people who came from North Africa into Spain and occupied. This is the opposite happening. These are Iranic peoples from the north going down into Spain and into North Africa. So history is very complex.
Yes, history is very complex. And I mean, if there's one thing anyone takes from this is, I don't know if anyone will, because it's not politically correct any longer, is that colonization is nothing new. And it's not unique. It's not unique to any particular person, people, continent, or skin color, with the possible exception of Antarctica being completely innocent.
Possibly, and we don't know. Maybe they wiped everyone out.
Yeah, we have no idea what's under that 2 miles of ice.
Jared Diamond, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's
Guns,
written a number of
Germs,
things.
and Steel, or whatever. Is that him?
That's right. That's one of them, and the third chimpanzee, so on and so forth. Right. He
That's
talks
me. I'm
about
the third.
genocide.
I'm the third chimpanzee. That's me.
I'm not far behind you. So, yeah, he talks about the history of genocide. And sadly, it's something that he demonstrates very, I mean, whether we like it or not, as a almost perennial fact of civilization. That it's going on now, it's always gone on. And he even goes on to say, without getting too far afield very quickly, that we tend to downplay genocides that the in-group, or what we consider our group, had a hand in. And we play it up if it's our enemy who had a hand in it.
Well, yeah.
And if it's some two groups that we don't care about, then it's sort of neutral,
right.
Sadly.
Right. It's also when you realize the complexities of the world, and any war, a civil war even, could probably be called, regional war, could be called a genocide, versus the more, you're trying to think of one race against another, and the more you delve into things, this whole three race concept, I think, was the 19th century, and is pitifully insufficient and inaccurate. There aren't three races. There's one race, and there's just lots of different. We can breed with each other. We do. I mean, that's how we got The Rock and J-Lo. I mean, that's why everyone's so beautiful.
Example. I agree with you. Like all these separations are entirely arbitrary. Yeah. It's where you want to, for some political or cultural reason, draw the line. There are cultural differences, there are linguistic differences, and also very interesting. But you're absolutely right that we can all interbreed. We are one human race, and people who are purists. Let's say this, and then I'll move on to Cyrus the Great, if you want. But people who are purists imagine that there was a time where there was the default race, and then from that point onward, it was corrupted somehow.
Right.
But they forget that any moment that you look at is itself the descendant of two generations before it.
Right.
So these are photographs in a motion picture, right? It really depends where you want to start the story and whether it fits a particular agenda.
Right. Which is why there's
no default.
Well, that's why the default is some sort of a godlike, or alien-like figure, which, oftentimes conveniently is, blonde, blue-eyed, and white. I mean, not to cast every believer of those things. Because I'm sort of a believer of that, but not with a racial component to it. But I don't know if you turn down the wrong, or maybe the right turn on any of these things, at some point you're going to encounter someone who makes it Aryan the wrong connotation. Aryan.
Look, I'm well aware of that, and it's very frustrating for me because I'm an Iranian immigrant myself, because that's our name. That's who we are culturally. Right. We're proud of it, and yet that name has been taken away from us by these racists. I can't put it any other way.
Right. I mean, less than a century. There's millennia of history of one thing, and basically less than a century of history, and it overtakes all of that.
Yeah, that's right. And we have a situation where people are talking about their own cultures and taking pride in their own cultures, and here's a culture that can't say their own name without being looked at askew. First of all, they're not seen as Aryans by the fake Nazi Aryans. And then when they demonstrate that they are, say, "Oh, then you're a racist." No.
Right.
You can't win either way.
Right. It's a catch-22.
So this is actually a good transition to something, an evolutionary step culturally, which I think the figure that comes to mind is Cyrus the Great. Should we jump into that?
Sure, because we had a conversation when we were first getting to know each other during the course of the week. We were talking, and I mentioned, because I'm always trying to brag about some of the great guests I've had on the show, and some of the other history podcasts as well, because Garden of Doom is a bit of a trivial name, and the show tends not to be trivial most of the time. Though I reserve the right to be trivial plenty of the time as well, because I want to entertain as well. Anyway, there was the episode Our Fake History with Sebastian Major, the host of Our Fake History. One of the segments was, who do you think the most important person in history was? And I chose Alexander the Great for a variety of reasons, and you can listen to that show. And Sebastian said, good choice, but I'm going to say Constantine I, mostly because of the Christianization, but you can listen to his takes on that show as well. Well, when I relayed that to Darius, he said, I think I can make a pretty good case for Cyrus the Great. So, without further ado, take us where you wanted to lead to, but the conclusion can be the case for Cyrus the Great. It's pretty compelling.
Sure, yeah.
Spoiler.
Listen, I think Alexander is important. So is Constantine, for a different reason.
It's hard to pick the most important. So
no. And and I don't claim Cyrus the Great is necessarily demon, but I think he's head and shoulders above those two, and for legitimate, not just nationalistic reasons. Cyrus the Great first of all, was the founder of the Achaemenian Empire, or what is known in the West as the First Persian Empire, the famous Persian Empire that fought the Greeks. The Persian Empire, which never called itself Persian, by the way, they knew themselves as Iranians, Aryans. They included many Iranian peoples, including the Medes, who wouldn't want to be called Persians, and a lot of people who were not Iranians as part of the empire. But anyway, they have been known in the West as the Persian Empire, so we'll continue to use that term so as not to confuse people. It was the first true empire in history, according to many historians, in the sense that prior to that there had been the Assyrians and the Egyptians conquered some lands that were not their own, so on and so forth. But they were not empires in the sense that you had multiple nations governing themselves within a larger federal system. If the Assyrians conquered you, you became Assyrians, right? And they did it in the most brutal possible way. Under Cyrus the Great, here we have the first leader that allows the 4 or 5 various kingdoms that he conquered, which included Lydia, and with that came Greek Ionia, Mesopotamia, Babylon, parts of India to the east, and the Medes. His son would go on to conquer Egypt. It was the first true world empire in the sense that it was cosmopolitan. You were allowed to keep your own religion, your own language, your own governing system to a great extent, so long as you paid taxes. And so it's what many historians call a proto-federalist system, not that different from the Jeffersonian concept of the United States, but the ancient version of that.
Sure.
And Cyrus, unlike earlier conquerors, especially very much unlike his immediate predecessors, the Assyrians, who were notoriously savage in their treatment of conquered peoples, Cyrus freed people. One example is when he conquered the kingdom of Lydia and the Greek Ionians that came along with that.
Where's Lydia?
He made, what's that?
Where's Lydia?
So Lydia is what is now Western Turkey, or Eastern Greece. You know, at that time, what is now Western Turkey was part of the Greek world.
So what I would call Anatolia, obviously.
Yeah, Anatolia, Asia Minor, yeah. And he instead of killing their king, he made him a trusted advisor to the royal court. An even more famous example, well, 2 examples, when he
put him on the small
Babylon.
council like Game of Thrones.
That's right. That's right. At the end, I want to mention the connection between Game of Thrones and all of this.
Invitation accepted.
Yeah. So Cyrus entered Babylon as a liberator. They opened the gates to him. Now, how much of that is propaganda, we're not exactly sure. But the fact that he wanted to give off that impression is itself a unique and new thing in history.
Well, that sounds like Daenerys when she went to Meereen.
That's right. That's right. And he, perhaps the most important act of liberation that he's responsible for is the liberation of the Jews from the Babylonian captivity, the Hebrews. Without that act, there would be no Hebrew peoples, and therefore no Christianity and no Islam. The world would be unrecognizable from the direction that it ended up going. Cyrus is referred to in the Bible as Messiah, or Messiah. He's the only historical figure, in fact, and certainly the only non-Jew to be called Messiah. And the phrase, the writing is on the wall?
Yep.
That's where that comes from. There was graffiti on the walls of Babylon that there's a liberator coming that will overthrow your oppressor and free you. And Cyrus did just that. He not only liberated the the Jewish people, but he paid to have their temple rebuilt in Judea, Israel, the Second Temple, as it's now known. And of course, what historians today say is about a third of the Jews who had been conquered by the Babylonians and Assyrians before that and were living in captivity in Babylon. A third of them chose to stay because, they were living good lives. A third of them went further east and lived and migrated to Persia itself, where they live to this day, the Iranian Jews. Many of them have left since the revolution and live in Los Angeles now. But there's still some.
I would love to talk to an Iranian Jew in Iran. I don't even know if that's possible.
Yeah, no, I have Jewish family in Iran and here. I have a Jewish Iranian cousin.
Well, look at here.
Make that happen.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so these are some of the oldest Jewish communities in the world. And about a third went back to Judea. And the Persian kings, actually, the later Persian kings like Xerxes and Artaxerxes, paid to rebuild the temple. Now, that in and of itself is a monumental historical landmark, because without that happening, no Judaism, no Christianity, no Islam.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's not that he just freed these peoples, but really had nothing to do with the content of their theology. It's during this time that the old Hebrew religion becomes what we now would consider Judaism, right? And it's during this time that certain theological concepts, such as heaven and hell, such as monotheism, as opposed to the henotheism that the Hebrews had before the Zoroastrian Persian influence, came into being. The concept of a devil, the concept of angels and demons. Historians of religion are very well familiar with this, but I am certain that the majority of the populace has no clue that these basic, what we now consider Judeo-Christian concepts, did not exist in the Hebrew religion prior to the Zoroastrian colonization.
Yeah, these are things that we can't even talk about, because, I spoke to an Orthodox rabbi in Israel, though strangely from Mexico, about Kabbalah. I had two Orthodox Jews from where I am, Baltimore. One I went to college with, but I haven't seen him since. The other one is a lawyer I know from the lawyer's page. And, to talk to them about anything that predates whatever the Jewish calendar is, what's 5722 or 5822 or whatever, that, it doesn't register. Wait, let me finish. It doesn't even, that's like hitting a wall. It's not possible to even talk about something like that. But I recently heard a podcast called The Ancient World. The guy's name is Scott. I think I actually posted it, but it sounds like that Yahweh was not a singular God until much later, and the word Israel has something to do with like L-E-L, like the same when you hear like a lot of Muslim names is hyphen L at the end, is the one, and the Isra is like to struggle, and it comes like Jacob was struggling with the angel Isra, and so it's to struggle, or Jacob, or with Michael, or something. So Israel actually comes from that, and the ancient Hebrews were actually, the Canaanites. They were all the same basically, and they had basically the same gods. Maybe some different names. Maybe one said Aspharte, the other said Astarte, but it was the same stuff. But the concept of monotheism did not occur when Abraham, may or may not have sacrificed or not sacrificed Jacob, or was about to, 5,700 years ago or whatever. It was more like the time period you're talking about, more like, 3,500 years ago, or
let me, if I can jump in here.
Yeah, please.
To try to clarify something.
I'm definitely getting out of my depth.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Let me try to clarify the timeline here. The argument is not whether Judaism in its earliest incarnations is older than Zoroastrianism. It may be, but religions evolve over time. Mm-hmm. The Judaism that we know now is not the same as its origins.
Right.
So during the time of the Persian colonization of Israel, so we're talking about 5th century BC now, relatively recent compared to much older Old Testament history, is the claim by historians of religion is that it's during that time that the Zoroastrian Indo-European influences came into the ancient Hebrew religion.
Mm-hmm.
Reza Aslan, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a scholar of religion. He's written a number of famous books. He had a show on CNN for a couple of years. His famous book that got him onto that infamous Fox News interview was Zealot, about the life of Jesus Christ.
Oh.
Anyway, Aslan calls Zoroastrianism far and away, and without exaggeration, the most important religion in the history of religions. Now, how is that? Because Zoroastrianism today is a tiny religion.
Right. No one's heard of it. No, almost nobody even knows it existed.
Yeah, it's unless you're a part of that culture, you don't know. However, its influence is vastly greater than its numbers. So, it was the world's first monotheistic religion. By the way, well, I'll come back to that later. Its influence was twofold. First, it was a reformation of the much older Indo-Aryan paganistic Mithraic religions. So Zoroaster isn't really inventing something new, but he's a reformer figure who's reforming the old Indo-Aryan pantheon into a monotheistic, progressive, ethically dualist theology, right? And it's that Zoroastrian religion that influences the Hebrews during the 5th through 3rd centuries BC, while they're under Persian colonization. And it's during that time that the Babylonian Talmud is written. And when you look at what comes after that, it's an unrecognizable religion compared to what it was before. Previously, it had been basically a volcano deity named Yahweh, right? A very tribal, and it was influenced by this very abstract universalist these abstract universalist Zoroastrian notions during that period of 5th century, 3rd century BC. And after that is when the rabbinical Judaism that we know today comes into being. And that's not by coincidence, according to the historians of religion. So what are some of these differences? I would say that prior to the Zoroastrian influence on Judaism, or the old Hebrew religion, Judaism didn't yet contain the concept of one God. It didn't have the concept of an afterlife, which, when we look at it today, seems impossible, because it seems like it's always been a part of the religion. Mm-hmm. Heaven or hell. Nor did it display any sense of reverence for individual conscience and personal. What I mean by that is, as opposed to group responsibility. So the gods would come and punish entire people. They would drown them. They would burn them for the sins of, a few individuals. And that was considered perfectly normal and perfectly ethical. Yahweh was, prior to the Zoroastrian influence, a local tribal deity that punished entire peoples collectively for the supposed sins of disobedience of the tribe or the clan or the nation or the group. Zoroastrian theology, on the other hand, was unique in the world up to that time in its emphasis on personal judgment and responsibility, and it espoused a universal, progressive sense of history.
Around what time? Around what year are we talking about? I know that we said we don't know when Zoroaster first emerged, but
so Zoroaster, my belief is that I go with the later dates, around 7th to 1200 BC. But if we're talking about when was its influence on Judaism, it's from 500 BC. It's when the Persians conquered Judea and liberated them from the Babylonian captivity, rebuilt the temple. We're talking about 500 BC to 300 BC, about 250 years.
And which some of that, which is only about 500 years before the sort of the beginning and sort of when we believe the Bible was finished being written. Of course, there's been about 30,000 different versions of the Bible since.
That's right. The books of the Bible are written by many various groups over vast numbers of centuries.
Right. And
many of them, as I'm sure you know, were thrown out of the Council of Nicaea. And there's a lot of apocrypha that's not part of the canonical Bible. So on.
We have a show on that, by the way. I think I call it the apocryphal. It doesn't matter. It's just, you'll find the show. Whatever. If there's a word apocryphal or something apocrisy in it, it's that's that show, and it's very good with Chris Ames, who's terrific.
Yeah. So some of these, I'll just give you a short list of some very major concepts that historians of religion believe entered into Judaism from Zoroastrianism. They include hell. They include a devil. And by the way, let me take a moment on the devil there, because in philosophy there and in theology, there's always been an issue throughout the centuries and millennia called the problem of evil, which is the following. How is it that a God that's omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent could have allowed for evil?
Sure.
Either he is evil or he's not omnipotent or omniscient. And so the Zoroastrian solution to that is that there's the God of pure good, and then there's a devil. That's where evil comes from. That way you don't have to put it on God's shoulders, right? And angels and demons that in Zoroastrianism, the seven spenta, later on become the seven archangels in Christianity.
So the seven again.
Heaven,
always the seven.
Heaven, or sorry.
It's very oftentimes it's the seven, then the seven sort of grows into the 9 later on, I think, as people can see more stars.
Yeah, the numbers change. Heaven, or to use the word paradise.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Bless you. Timing.
Yeah, exactly right.
Heaven, or to use the Persian word paradise. The word paradise in Western languages, both the word and the concept come from the Iranian word paradisia, and the Greek version of that paradisa, which becomes paradise in most of the Western European languages, which refers to both the Zoroastrian concept and also, interestingly, to an actual physical walled garden, pleasure garden. The paradisa gardens that are famous throughout Persian history, started by Cyrus the Great, is the earliest one we found, all the way to today's Shiraz.
That's not the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Is it something different?
It's related, and it's different. In fact, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were built by the local ruler. I forget if it was Nebuchadnezzar or someone else of that era, for his Iranian queen, a Mede Iranian, not a Persian Iranian, because she came from the highlands of the Zagros Mountains and was used to a cold, cooler, verdant climate. And here she was in Mesopotamia, where it's hot and arid. And so he had these terraced gardens built to remind her of home.
Aww.
So there's a connection there as well.
That's lovely.
And yeah, and now we think they may not be in Babylon, might have been in Nineveh, but who's counting?
Oh, Nineveh. Okay, but that's one of my favorite words. I do appreciate the comparisons to Judaism, but I don't want to get too caught up in how did Zoroastrian influence Judaism. I'm more interested in what's Zoroastrianism, and then people can draw their own conclusions, because if we start with one particular religion, then we have to go to the others as well. Whereas if we just talk about Zoroastrianism, then people can draw their own comparisons to their own religions or whatever they study or whatever it is.
Some of these concepts, heaven and hell, the resurrection, the notion of end times eschatology, where there's something toward which history is building. There's an end point to history, as opposed to what most of the cultures during that era believed, or their paradigm, I should say, which was cyclical. If you look at either the Indo-Aryan cultures of India, Hinduism, or even Greek culture, which is another branch of Indo-European, they're in the Homeric age anyway, their concepts were cyclical, that there's no real sense of progress there. In fact, if there's any changes, it's a downward shift from a golden age to a silver age to a bronze age. Things are getting progressively worse.
Which is also like Game of Thrones.
That's true. You're a big fan, huh?
Well, yeah, and I just rewatched it, but I mean, it always struck me that while most of their customs hadn't changed, their technology got worse. I mean, they didn't have any more of the good steel. They didn't know what obsidian was for. I mean, nothing advanced. They didn't have better ships. I mean, nothing was better. They even ruined the dragons.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So the cyclical notion was the norm in most religions, whether of the Indo-Aryans in India, or of the Greeks, or of the Near Eastern religions.
Okay, this is a Jeff Crazy theory, but we have to have one Jeff Crazy theory in every show. Do you think that's because of collective memories of floods, like in that there was a civilization before floods, the floods wipe them out, they start over again, and that sort of, I mean, the Maya have the 5 ages of man, a lot of the First Nations have that. I mean, it sounds like everyone does, and it seems to me that the only things that would account for that would be sort of your floods. I mean, I know that there's theories about the comet during the Younger Dryas, but I mean, most people would be dead already. So I'm thinking floods is probably the big one. Whether, you know, I'm sure it took 1,000 years before the different floods hit different parts of the world, but that seems to be the one thing that the entire Earth has in common and would have affected all people, maybe imprinted on their minds.
Yeah, no, I am open to the flood theory. There's many. I don't want to get too distracted with that because I don't know. None of us know, right? But there's the psychological interpretations of that, the Jungian, or where Joseph Campbell would fall, for example. And then there's the more recent archaeological evidence that maybe there was some sort of an actual flood, right? Having to do with, exactly like you say, Younger Dryas, something to do with the receding ice age and so on and so forth. We're talking about 10,000 BC, whatever the case may be. I don't know. It could certainly be. You know, there's those who say that you were really the people of the Near East, when they were talking about a global flood, may really just have been talking about a local flood between the Tigris and Euphrates.
Sure.
Because to them, that was the whole world.
But that was their global flood, but the flood occurred further north, 400 years later, and, and further south,
On the other hand, I mean, you probably sounds like you're aware of the new theories that around the Black Sea, that perhaps there was an actual cataclysmic event where the Mediterranean through the Aegean flooded into the Black Sea and made it much larger in a very short amount of time.
Right.
An actual, real cataclysmic event, which for those people would have seemed like a global event. I don't know. It's possible. But regardless, Zoroaster was the first person to have this notion of a progressive sense of history, at the end of which there would be a coming Messiah. Here's another one of the parallels, right, to what later became Judeo-Christianity and Islam, but really gets its start in Zoroastrianism. And he was named the Sioshant, the Messiah that would come back. And in addition to heaven and hell, there's also another Zoroastrian concept, which is similar to, or a parallel with, I'm blanking out on the word, in between. What's the
limbo?
What's the term? What's that?
Limbo,
yes.
purgatory.
That's right, purgatory. Yeah.
Finally, I'm useful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So all of those concepts, heaven, hell, angels, demons, a day of judgment where a soul would have to walk across a bridge underneath. There's a fire, and depending on how much good you've done in your lifetime, that compared to all the bad that you've done in your life would be weighed on a cosmic scale. And of course, there's a fairly good ending to all this, because even the people who go to hell only stay there for a period of time. And at the end, the angels of heaven storm the gates of hell and rescue them.
Oh, that's nice too.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that some of the things I don't necessarily think of cycles, like they are like everyone's going, what's he talking about? Well, the Greek gods didn't start things. They came from the Titans and the Titan Nakame. And the Titans, they came from somewhere. And in Norse, it's the same thing. The gods, they didn't come from nothing. They came from, like, the giants were already here. There were already the fire giants. There was a giant cow who licked an iceberg and a giant came out of it. The gods came later. So these are all different ages because something came before and something probably came before those things. So it's almost like it's the same story sort of repeating itself, just this
in fact, I'll tell you a difference there. So when you talk about Titans and such, in the Indo-Aryan or Indic side of the Indo-Aryan and Indo-Iranian divide, the Hindu side, the Titans, there are the Titans and the Ashuras, and the Titans are the ones who are revered. Zoroaster turns that around and makes the Ashuras the entities to be revered. And the highest of the Ahura Mazda, which is the Ashura or Ahura of Mazda means wisdom, is the supreme deity, right? He turns it around as a break with the. Let me also go back a little bit and sort of give a little historic context to this. Zoroaster is said to have lived whenever that date was, and there's no real agreement on that. But he was constantly complaining because Zoroaster is an actual historic figure. It's an actual person. He talks about his family, his wives. It's not an abstract notion. There's definitely a person there. He talks about how horrific life was with one cattle raiding tribe murdering and butchering another every second day. And so he thought, this can't be the way we go about life.
Right.
And so he comes up with the first ethical notion of history, where human beings, through our actions, actually help the god of wisdom in his battle against the devil, Arian. And it's existentialist in that sense, you could say, that through our actions, we will determine, the outcome is not for sure yet. We will determine that the side or the angels of light will win the battle against the demons of darkness.
Well,
so it's an ethical progressive dualism, right? And so that's Zoroastrianism's answer to the age-old problem of evil. How can you have evil in the world if God is all-knowing and all-powerful? Well, there's a devil, and you have to help God in beating the devil, essentially.
Now,
so those are the notions that, writ large, that historians of religion believe seeped into Judaism, and then from there, also obviously into Christianity and Islam, which are children of Judaism.
Yeah, the interesting is, and people can listen to the shows with the Jewish scholars. They actually say that Judaism does not have a heaven or hell. We just there's a afterlife, and there is no singular devil. So I guess they can sort of claim monotheism, though. I mean, what are angels and what are demons if they're not demigods? Or so they're immortal beings with powers. But Christianity definitely has a devil, which really is dualistic, and I believe Islam is the same. I'm not sure.
Let me address that specific point. That's right. So again, when we say Judaism, what are we talking about? Because it differs from era to era, right? Mm-hmm. So the argument here, the narrative, is that these concepts entered into Judaism at the time, but they didn't really stay within Judaism. Judaism changed, but they did. These are the very concepts that did transition into Christianity and Islam, right? So it's these specific Zoroastrian concepts that actually made it through this vehicle of Judaism into the much, much larger world religions, both of Christianity and Islam, where you see them much more profoundly. Christianity is definitely a dualistic religion in a way that Judaism is not today.
I would argue that they're all paganism. You're just calling angels and demons a different word other than lesser gods. But okay, but enlightening hasn't hit me yet.
When you say pagan, we have to be careful with that term because Pagani, I think, originally just means people of the countryside, right? I would say I would put the pre-Zoroastrian Indo-Iranian religion, the Indo-Aryan religions of Mithra and Indra and all those, as within the realm of paganism. And I would say Zoroastrianism is not paganism. It's a monotheistic or monotheizing, as they say, religion. That's where I would the pre-Zoroaster, I would say, is pagan, and post-Zoroaster. Although it's complicated because, as we'll get to in a moment, when we get to the Mithraic influence on Rome, we see that Zoroastrianism itself has reincorporated some of these old Mithraic pagan gods back into its theology again.
Wow.
And not too dissimilar from how Catholicism incorporated a lot of the pagan Roman and Greek pantheon as angels, and saints and so on and so forth. Very similar parallel development there.
It's probably then a good, and Zoroastrianism still exists, though as you said, it's a relatively small religion at this point. But for a while,
it does. Let me say a couple of words on what's happened to the Zoroastrians themselves.
Okay.
So Zoroastrianism became a major religion in the Achaemenian Persian Empire, the world's first true world cosmopolitan empire. Although there's some debate as to whether it was the official religion or not. Then Alexander overthrew the House of Achaemen, and for about 150 years, Iran came under Hellenistic influence and colonization. But very quickly, after about 150 years, an East Iranian peoples, the Parthians, the Parni, one of these Scythian types, came back in and helped kick out the Greeks and revitalized Iranian culture. And they were more Mithrais. They were not Zoroastrians like the Persians were. They were the pre-Zoroastrian, more pagan, as you would say, shamanistic Indo-Aryan believers, right? And the Persians tried to convert them to Zoroastrianism, and it was a constant battle. It's been a conflict within Iranian civilization to this day. And they were so they ruled Iran as the counterweight to Rome from around 200 BC to around 200 AD, the Parthian Empire. That's the second Iranian empire.
Was Parthia just the name of a city, or was it the name of a language group, or where's the word come from?
It's a people.
It's a people.
Parthia had been a northeast province of the Persian Empire, but it's also specifically the name of a particular Indo-Iranian people called the Parni, an East Iranic people who were part of the Daha Scythian Confederacy.
So is this also like your sort of Turkmenistan to Afghanistan strip?
Yeah, but there were no Turks there yet. They're still ethnically Iranic, but what today would be Tajikistan, Afghanistan, that's right.
Okay.
That whole area northeast of Iran. What today is Central Asia.
Where's Chaldea? I'm sorry.
That's much earlier, and we've passed that.
Oh, well, where is it anyway, just geographically, and then we can move away from it?
In the Near East, between Mesopotamia and the Levant.
Oh, okay. So Jordan, it's basically.
Well west of what we're talking about.
Okay, and Phrygia is my last random place before I let you just take it away with Mithras and all that. Where's Phrygia?
Yeah, that's also in what is now Western. Yeah, I'm confused. Western Turkey, Anatolia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the only reason I asked about Phrygia is because Castlevania.
Oh. So the second Iranian empire that had something to do with Zoroastrianism were the Parthians, and these became the main rivals to Rome, right? And they were sort of a syncretic culture. They were pre-Zoroastrian Iranic. There was some Zoroastrian Persian influence on them, and there was a lot of Hellenistic influence on them. In fact, Mithridates, the word Mithra, you hear in there,
sure,
was a Greco-Persian, or Greco-Iranian more specifically, or more accurately, king. There were a number of Mithridates, but Mithridates Pontus, the Poison King, set up a kingdom on the Black Sea which fought Rome in the early Republican era. 3 times. There was 3 Mithridatic wars that almost took down Rome in its infancy. And he fought Rome on behalf of Greco-Iranian culture. Today, people think of, the Persians as the enemies of, but during this era, the Greeks and the Parthian Iranians saw themselves as one culture, and the Romans were these new barbarians. Who the hell are they?
Wait, I know this. Was the area called Pontus, and did they try to ally themselves through marriage with either an Antioch king or a Seleucid king?
Right. You're in the right ballpark. Yes.
Yeah.
We're talking about, again, Anatolia, Western Turkey today, and that region during Parthian times, so we're talking about between 200 BC to 200 AD, right? Became part of Iran's second major empire, the Parthian Empire. However, a sub-branch of that were these Mithridatic Pontic kings, who were partly Iranian. In fact, Mithridates the Sixth, Mithridates the Great, the Poison King, as they call him, because he, through his lifetime, tried to give himself small doses of poison.
Oh, right. He tried
that story.
And he lived longer than, like, when everything fell out around him, he couldn't kill himself.
He couldn't kill himself, so he actually asked some of his guards to slaughter him in his tent.
Right, and they did.
Yeah, they did. Single-handedly took on Rome in 3 separate wars, and almost won, but didn't. But in any case, he traced his lineage, whether he invented that lineage or if it's true. If it's true, he has one of the greatest royal lineages in history. On one side to Darius the Great, and on the other to Alexander the Great.
Oh, well, sure.
So, you know he's going to do well.
Yeah.
But in any case, the Parthian Empire was replaced by the third pre-Islamic major Iranian civilization, the Sasanians. They're the first empire that actually instituted Zoroastrianism as the official, for the first time, state religion of Iran, an orthodox version of Zoroastrianism. And that's 200 AD to 700 AD, up until the Islamic invasions.
Okay.
So they were the counter to Rome and to Byzantium, the two major empires of the Western world, or the Occidental world, during that era were the Byzantines and Romans on the one side, and the Parthian and Sasanian Persians and Iranians on the other. And it's during this time that there's another wave of Iranian religious influence on the West. This time Mithraic, because the people in charge of Iran now are these East Iranian Parthians, who are less Zoroastrian and more pagan Mithraic. And the history tells us that it was around 200 BC that Iranian Mithraism started to seep into the Roman Empire. How did it happen? Some of it happened, we're not exactly sure, but through trade, right? Because ideas traveled just like they did on the Silk Road as easily as goods. And some of it more consciously was exported by the so-called Cilician pirates, who were sort of as Dr. Giorgiani has claimed, a black ops navy of the Parthians to try to spread Mithraism into the Roman legions. They did this very successfully.
So Jesuits at sea.
What's that?
Jesuits at sea.
Sort of, yeah. To the point where by the time of the historic Jesus, Mithraism was a major, if not the major religion of the Roman Empire. Now, think of what we're talking about here. Rome's major enemy in the world were the Parthians. Right. And this Parthian religion has taken over almost all the legionaries.
Right. So it's not Jupiter, it's not Vulcan, it's not Mars, it's Mithras.
No, it's Mithras. And in fact, we have so far found something over 150 Mithraeum. These are Mithraic temples built by the Romans throughout the Roman Empire during this era, from as far east as the Levant to as far northwest as Scotland.
Wow.
Right.
You need to tell the Mithras origin story, because it's very striking, and I think you have to start with the best estimate as to the year in terms of BCE.
Yeah. So Mithraism is Mithra, or Mitra, as he's known in Persian, and also on the Indian side of the Indo-Aryan pantheon. Mitra is also a Hindu god, right? Is older than Zoroastrianism. Now, remember what I was saying before. Zoroaster was simply a reformer of this ancient pagan Indo-Aryan religion. Mithra is a specific god known, from what we know, we don't know that much about the theology. It was a secretive religion in the Roman Empire as well, so it doesn't really help. But he's known as the god of contracts and oaths. So later on, this was also interpreted as an interloper between God and the devil, not dissimilar from the Jesus character or role, where he's interceding on behalf of mankind to help us. Right? And this is very important because there's all sorts of theories out there and have been for centuries, much of it suppressed by the Roman Catholic Church, that Christianity itself is really largely Mithraism, with some other things thrown in. So Mithraism became the major religion of the Roman Empire at the same time, just prior to the time of the supposed historic Jesus. Do you want me to get into some of the similarities as far as the symbology there yet? Or no?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so one major one is the date of Christmas. 25th, nobody knows when Jesus, the historic Jesus, the Palestinian Jew Jesus was born. No, we have no clue. Even assuming there was such a person, which I think there was. I think, there's enough evidence outside the Bible itself that there was such a person. But no one knows his birthday. The date of Christmas is a Mithraic holiday. His birthday was celebrated in the Roman Empire on the 24th and 25th of December.
How convenient.
Yeah. Then the Christmas tree. The Christmas tree was also a Mithraic. In the Mithraic Iranian world, the specific tree that was used was the sarb, which is a cypress tree. And what they did in Mithraic ritual is they would decorate this tree, and they would put presents around it. Oh. I kid you not. So this whole notion, what would Judea at the time have to do with evergreen trees? Well, nothing really. But when you see the Mithraic influence, then it makes total sense because it was already a tradition.
Right. Well, good news, America and modern world. We're not the only ones who are commercial.
Well, say that again?
We're not the only ones who commercialize a holiday.
Yeah, no, I don't know if it was commercial, but it was definitely So, Christmas, according to this theory, is similar to the birth of light, a tradition that in the Iranian world is still celebrated today. We celebrate it in my family every year on the 23rd, 24th of December, and we call it Yalda, the birth of light, symbolically, right? Mm-hmm. In the Roman Empire, they also did this. And in fact, there was a specific Roman cult called Sol Invictus, which is parallel to Mithra. Now, another one, give me my notes here.
Isn't that Yule? Isn't Yule from that?
Well, Yalda and Yule, some scholars of religion and some people more familiar than I am with etymology claim that Yalda is actually a Syriac word. Others say that no, it's Indo-European. That is Yal and day, Da being day, mm-hmm. which is very similar to Yule, day. Right? Which makes total sense because, again, if it comes from the Mithraic Indo-Iranian side, that goes back to Proto-Indo-European, another branch of which is the Norse, right?
Yes.
So all of this could go back all the way to the Proto-Indo-European. We're not sure. But etymologically, it sure sounds like it could be.
Yeah, and it's right. It's also right around what we now know to be the winter solstice as well, which may or may not be.
Well, that's the same thing. That's exactly the same thing. The Mithraic Yalda is winter solstice.
There you go.
Right. Another parallel between, at least in the symbology, is the concept of the virgin birth. Mithra is born of a virgin. In ancient tradition, Mithra was born of his virgin mother, the Aryan goddess Anahita.
Oh, okay.
Right. Referred to as the Immaculate Virgin Mother of Lord Mithra.
Aha.
Right. So around the time of the birth of Christianity, this religion, with this symbology and all this theology and these stories around it, is the prevalent religion of the Roman Empire. Coincidence, right?
Right. Is there something about like the star and wise men or magi? Is there any parallel?
Well, yeah,
there?
there's we'll get to that in a moment.
Oh, okay.
So there's also Sunday as the holy day.
Mm-hmm.
In Mithraism, as it is in Christianity. Like Christianity, Mithra's sacred day was Sunday, the Lord's Day. Mm-hmm. And that was hundreds of years before the appearance of the historic Jesus. Another parallel is, the wafers?
Yeah, the communion wafer.
Yes, in the Roman Catholic tradition. The communion celebrations, Iranian Mithrais ate wafers made from wheat and inscribed with a cross. The Mithraic order, in fact, had a communion feast with sacred wine and loaves of wheat bread marked with an equilateral cross, a little different, more like an X, than a cross, mm-hmm. right? With astrological meaning. And like Jesus, Mithra set his mark on the foreheads of his soldiers. And it's notable that Mithraic rituals, class distinctions were invalidated. Even a slave could be the equal of an aristocrat based on his degree of initiation within the cult, right? Then there's, the Christian crucifix itself, speaking of the cross. Is there a relationship there? According to this narrative, it's been interpreted as ultimately an astrological symbol, and it represents the crossing of the celestial equator in astrology with the ubiquitous image of Mithra slaying the bull. I don't know if you've seen that image of Mithras in Roman tradition. It's all over the Roman Empire of Mithra slaying the bull, and that's meant to be an astrological sign of one era superseding another. Mm-hmm. Symbols, we see it throughout the Roman Empire, and in fact, if you are familiar with the image of Mithras, the god Mithras in Roman iconography, he's always wearing that Smurf-looking hat. To put it, I can't think of a better way of putting it. It was known in that era as the Phrygian hat. It's always associated with Iranian people, with Parthians. If you look at any of the Roman depictions of Parthians, there's two ways you can tell that they're Parthians. They're wearing pants, polka dot trousers, as opposed to togas, and they have this bent-over Phrygian Smurf-looking hat.
Conical hats, curved, concave conical hats.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, there's some theories that the bishop's mitre, I think it's spelled M-E-T-R-E, I'm not exactly sure, hat is a reference to this Mithraic symbology. Christmas tree we already talked about. Then there's the Christmas colors, right, which are red, green, and white. Mm-hmm. It's been suggested by some recent scholars that even red, white, and green colors that we associate with Christmas may be ultimately derived from the Mithraic caste colors, being warriors, green representing agriculture, and white representing royalty. Mm-hmm. And then I'll mention another one, which there's a great book. Now we're going to get into the Terence McKenna, mushroom stuff. Okay. That mushrooms or muscaria mushrooms, we're talking about magic mushrooms, or hallucinogenic mushrooms, not normal mushrooms. Been noted by a number of researchers that these magic mushrooms contained hallucinogenic psilocybin and were known to be grown and were used. First of all, they grew around the evergreen trees, right, that we already mentioned. and were used to spike the wine during these Mithraic communion celebrations that took place underground in these Roman Mithraeum. These very secretive
temples.
Let's say, I wouldn't say celebrations, but what I guess you could compare it to today's secret societies, right?
Okay.
Let's imagine the Freemasons.
Sure, why not?
And maybe the most interesting parallel to me between Mithraism and Christianity, which again are existing at the same time in the same location, right? The birth of Christianity is happening within this environment where Mithraism is already prevalent. Is that the St. Peter's Basilica itself, now we know, is built right on top of a Mithraeum.
Right.
Underneath St. Peter's Basilica, archaeologists have found the remains. And this, by the way, is not entirely a new thing in history. It's well known that when there's a new religion, they tend to build their sites on top of the, yeah. So I would love at some point to be able to go and explore beneath, both the library at the Vatican and underneath St. Peter's. But there's a Mithraeum directly underneath St. Peter's. You mentioned the three wise men, is that what you, or the Magi?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's another connection here. So sometimes, we talk about in today's terminology, the three kings. That's a much later terminology. There's no reference to the three kings per se, as far as I know, till about the 7th century. Originally, they were simply called the Magi. And Magi are Zoroastrian and Mithraic priests. That's the name of, sort of like Druids or the priests in the Celtic culture. Mm-hmm. The Magi were Zoroastrian and Mithraic priests. And they were also Magi known for being good at astronomy and astrology. In fact, our word in Western languages, magic, derives from Magi.
I figured as much.
Yeah. And so every Christian knows the story, three wise men, Magi. When Jesus was about to be born, the three Magi, or Zoroastrian Mithraic priests, predicted the birth of a baby who would be the Messiah, and he'd become the king of the Jews and the Son of God. In Persia, or in Iran, these Zoroastrian priests and Magi were also renowned astronomers. They were, and astronomy and astrology were really one art during that time. And they were said to have traveled from the east. Now, in Roman geography of the time, everything east was Parthian. Mm-hmm. Right? And in fact, there's a great mosaic. I wish I had it here to show, but you should look it up at some point, from Ravenna in Italy, which is the oldest depiction of the Magi. And they are depicted in their Parthian polka dot trousers and their Phrygian hats, bringing gifts.
Oh, very nice. But that's pretty. That's the closest we have to contemporary, attestation, as we say in my business, but a witness, witness account.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Now, what is the meaning of that? So from the Iranian perspective, it's been argued that this is really a continuation of Zoroastrianism, that they had predicted the birth of the Siashans, which is the Zoroastrian, is the savior, right? But when you look at it this way, it's really the same thing we're talking about, because it's one culture complex. Yeah. Christianity is being born into a Roman Empire that's infused with this Mithraic tradition. Even some of the Roman emperors, in fact, after Constantine converted the Roman Empire officially to Christianity, and by the way, there had been previous attempts, like Diocletian had set the stage already, and Constantine's conversion. It wasn't a one and done deal. There were still Mithraic elements that fought for Mithraism, as opposed. It wasn't like Google had won the battle among the search engines yet.
No. This is only controversial because we're talking in 2022 or any time after, say, 400 AD. I mean, if we're probably if there's still humans around in 1,000 years, this will most likely not be controversial at all. It'll be, which religion is right, maybe a debate, but the timing of it and the chronology of it and the similarities are striking. Just like the story of Sargon is a lot like Moses.
I agree with you. There's two sorts of ways that people look at these things. There's the perspective of the person who comes from within the religion itself, and for them, if there's an initial source of some of their theology that comes from outside of their own tradition, as referenced in their own gospels, then they see it as a threat. But from the perspective of the historian of religion, there's no problem here at all. All of these ideas existed and were given different names, and most of these religions are syncretic. Right? And what I mean by that is they're a fusion of different traditions that come together.
Right. There's a train track, and it's sometimes a meander, sometimes the track is thinner, sometimes it's narrower, but you can sort of trace things going in one direction.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we have any holy wars declared on us, before that, I think that I think we should probably stop with the heavy duty content. I hope that you will agree to come back and we'll talk about things like creation stories and more about angels and demons and legends and monsters and the Nephilim and Anunnaki from the Persian version, so to speak. But I'm not going to let you go without allowing you a chance to give your Game of Thrones connection, unless I've already ruined it.
No. In fact, I'll end it with a couple of pop culture references that have to do with Zoroastrianism. One of them is Game of Thrones. In fact, the creator of Game of Thrones has officially come out and said that one of his sources is ancient Zoroastrianism.
Right. You
can look it up online. And that makes sense. And in fact, believe it or not, in Iran today, even in Muslim Iran, it's one of the most famous or one of the most popular shows because they see it as being so similar to our national epic, the Shahnameh, the Chronicle of Kings. Another couple of references I'll throw in is possibly the most famous Zoroastrian, I was going to say today, but he's dead now, is Freddie Mercury.
Okay.
Of Queen. Yeah. So he is a Parsi. I'll mention this. The Parsis are the Zoroastrian Iranians. The word Parsi simply comes from the word Pars, where we get Persia. So it just means Persian.
Okay.
Who fled Iran after the Islamic invasions to India and live in Bombay to this day. It's the world's largest continuous Zoroastrian community. They are extraordinarily influential, both financially. They own the Tata Group, one of the world's largest industrial families, and they were very, very influential in the independence movement against Britain of India. So they're a tiny community, about 100,000, but have an enormous influence. And Freddie Mercury was one of them.
Well, that's enough. I mean, Freddie Mercury. I mean, that's a legend. I think that's my tweet tomorrow. Every day I do like a fact of the day tweet. I just do a little fact, and I say that's the tweet. I think that will be mine tomorrow.
And of course, I can't let you go without mentioning the biggest one.
Please.
Which is Star Wars.
Okay.
Star Wars is all about good versus evil. Darth Vader and the Force it could not be more Zoroastrian than that. There are smaller ones, of course, video games. I read an article recently comparing I'm not much of a gamer, but Final Fantasy franchise to Zoroastrianism. But the big ones are Game of Thrones, Star Wars, and good old Freddie Mercury.
Those are certainly some good ones.
Oh, one more. There's also the Mazda car brand.
Oh, yeah.
I was shocked to hear this. The Zoroastrian god is Ahura Mazda, right? And if you look at the symbol of the car, Mazda, it looks like the symbol of the Ahura Mazda in ancient Persian art. And first I thought, no, this has got to be a coincidence. But it turns out, when I looked it up, no, the founder of Mazda car company was a Zoroastrian, even though he was Japanese.
Okay.
And so
religions don't recognize ethnicity. The heart wants what the heart wants, right? Okay. Well, I think this is a.
What, who's the great filmmaker who said something like the heart wants? Woody Allen's made.
Well, he also married his stepdaughter. But I thought you were going to go Jamie Lannister or Cersei Lannister, saying those philosophers. But yeah, hopefully you'll come back again and we'll talk about some of the myths and legends and the, sort of the more fun stuff. And we can certainly lend ourselves to, comparisons to Gilgamesh and Babylonian, Sumerian, and sort of the Indian panoply. But, sort of the, again, the Persian version of the heaven and hell and demons and angels and some of the names and, maybe some of the stuff from pop culture and comic books and horror movies and stuff like that. And we'll lighten it up a little bit with that, if you agree.
I'd love to do further conversations. In fact, I'll leave you with this. One of the, I don't know how light it is, but one of the topics that we could get into on a different conversation is the influence of these religions and Manichaeism on the Gnostic movement in Europe later on. But we'll leave that for another time. But it's been fun. I'm happy to come back on whenever you want me, and it's been fun for me, and I look forward to more discussions.
Well, there definitely will be, and we'll talk post-production about other ideas beyond that one, and the if you can get me in touch with an Iranian Jew living in Iran, that'd be wonderful. But this is your chance to promote all of your stuff. I know that you've been very you haven't talked about that you've got 2 books out there. We mentioned your podcast, but please promote whatever. This is a free promotion zone.
Oh, great. Well, let me start. The first easiest way to find me is simply my name, which is Darius Kamali, Kamali. That'll take you to Google and to my website and IMDb and so on and so forth. The podcast most relevant to our discussion today is the Persian version, which can be found on Anchor, on Spotify, on all of the major ones, the Persian version podcast. And it has its own side Facebook group as well. And yeah, I'm thankful you brought up the books as well. I have published a couple of small books recently during the pandemic, which are both available on Amazon, and they are called Dog Whistling Dixie Past the Graveyard and Mistake of Identity. So, between the website, the IMDb, the Persian version podcast, and those 2 books on Amazon, that's more information on me than I'm sure your listeners can handle in one setting.
You never know. They're a bright group. They're very ambitious. But anyway, I can't thank you enough for being on. You'll definitely be on again. Join our ever-expanding family of Garden of Doom part-time residents. And audience, thank you for listening in. Hope you found this to be educational, informative, and entertaining at points. And I promise next time we'll be more on the myth stuff. But I love the deep history and the movements of peoples and the interplays of religions. And if unless this is the first time you're listening, you love it too, because otherwise, why would you still be sticking around? So thank you again. You'll hear from us or me next week. And again, thank you, and thanks everyone for tuning into Garden of Doom.